The Mike Macdonald era is officially underway in Seattle with a victory. Connor Benintendi and I are going to be breaking down the Seahawks' preseason victory over the Chargers coming up next year on this post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined for this post-game bonus episode by my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Whether you're here where I'm at in Mountain Home, Idaho, hopefully you're not here for the reasons that I am today, or you're listening in nearby Seattle, Washington. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks opening the Mike Macdonald era. I know it's an unofficial win that won't count in the real standings, but a victory nonetheless. A commanding 16-3 win over the Chargers at SoFi Stadium. And Connor, the most exciting thing about this game, look, I know it's the preseason, not a ton of starters playing, both starting quarterbacks sideline. So you can't use this as a litmus test for what the regular season is going to look like. And yet, to an extent, you can, because it was just so much fun watching the way that Mike Macdonald's defense played throughout this game, giving up less than 200 total yards to the Chargers, just 3 points. And heck, on that drive, the Chargers only got 24 yards in 6 plays. It's not like they moved quickly down the field and had a bunch of explosive plays. But watching the way the Seahawks, even with a vanilla game plan, were mixing things up post-snap, what it looked like they were doing, and then what they ultimately ended up doing being totally different. The telecasters, Michael Bennett and company, were breaking that down, and it was just a ton of fun to watch this defense fly around from start to finish.
Yeah, and one of the things I was thinking about, over the first couple drives, Corbin, is, okay, we've got a couple 3-and-outs here, 3-and-outs, but we're playing against Easton Stick here. Let's not get overly excited. The first 2 drives obviously featured the Seahawks starters, and they looked really good, but obviously you're playing not against a full-strength offense here in this first preseason game. But then they stack 3 more 3-and-outs on top of that. They don't allow a first down for 6 drives to start the game. And at that point, that's when I started getting a little bit more excited, Corbin, because that's when it's like, okay, this first team, second team defense are both showing some level of just impenetrability, really, is what it comes down to, is they were not giving up yardage. They go into halftime, the Chargers had 71 yards of total offense. I mean, that was just, it was a great showing from this defense. They were flying around to the ball. They looked like they were ready to go. And I think that's what was one of the things that we really wanted to see from this defense is, are you guys prepared? Are you ready to go? Where's the physicality level going to be? How much are these guys wanting this football game, even though it's just preseason, right? And I think we saw in those first 6 drives, whenever you're playing the players that really matter when it comes down to the regular season, I think we saw that they really wanted this football game.
And obviously both teams had some key starters on both sides of the ball that didn't suit up. So again, it's a preseason game. You have to take the results with a grain of salt. And yet there's one statistic for both teams that maybe's got me a little more giddy than I should be coming out of a preseason game. But the Seahawks converting on 55% of their third downs in this game on offense, and the Chargers converting on 15%, and they were 0 for 7 in the first half. It was a shutout on third down. Those were the 2 worst metrics on this football team a year ago. And for them to come out and look, I know it's a preseason game, but to come out and be that much more efficient on offense on third down and be that dominant on defense, where only a couple of third downs late converted for the Chargers. And, oh, by the way, the third and fourth team defense, they may have bent a little bit, but they didn't break. They still didn't give up points late in the game. And you got plays from Marquise Blair, D. Williams, a number of guys in that secondary where they were able to ward off some drives that for a little while at least looked like they might have some promise for the Chargers. So this was really a dominant defensive effort, particularly on third down. I want to go to the third down on offense because to me, a player that we got to give some credit. Now, listen, he was not perfect. I thought that Sam Howell missed an opportunity when he dumped the ball off to George Holani early in the third quarter. If he would have thrown the ball a little higher, I think George Holani turns and runs into the end zone. But because he had to reach down and grab it, that kind of set him back a little bit. And then he got stopped at the 1 yard line. As we know, they ended up getting stuffed on 4th and 1 there. So there were some throws that Sam Howell missed. But what I really loved from what we saw from the quarterback in his first start as a Seahawk, his patience, his willingness to unload the football out of bounds a couple of times when there's clearly nothing open. He was making smart decisions with the football. And in that third quarter drive, they got him down deep into the red zone. We saw a couple of the explosive plays, ran a blitz on one of them to get the ball to Tariq Young. I just feel like we're starting to see some legitimate progress now from Sam Howell, who ended up finishing the game 16 for 27. Not a lot of explosive plays, but they were running a lot of bubble screens and quick hitters. It felt like more of a vanilla game plan type of thing. And yet, even with some offensive line issues at times, he was effective. He moved around in the pocket really well, extended plays, got the ball to his receivers. I was pleasantly surprised with the way that Sam Howell played. There's a lot to still work on, but he kind of now fits that gamer tag where he looked better in a game situation than on the practice field.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the biggest things that you saw between Sam Howell and PJ Walker in particular is Sam Howell did not put the ball in harm's way as much as PJ Walker did. And you saw that whenever Walker came in late in the game. You know, he had a couple near interceptions. And I think as much as Howell has been maligned, you know, by different sources throughout this training camp and things like that, and just his sort of slow development within this offense, you saw what you wanted to see out of Sam Howell in this first preseason game. And that was that when the offensive line was unable to protect him, he was able to find either an outlet or he was able to step up in the pocket, find a running lane, and get through that running lane. And that's exactly what you want to see out of the guy, because he is a guy who in Washington extended plays. He was not always an on-script quarterback. And that's part of what was encouraging about his game, right? He did throw 21 interceptions, but that was something that you could work with and you could try to iron those things out. So particularly on the red zone efficiency, Corbin, that drive that you were talking about, I was a little disappointed to see 3 straight run plays over and over again, you know, second, third, fourth down. I thought there would be a little bit more creativity, try to see what you can do with the passing game there. But overall, I wasn't too disappointed about that. I thought overall the third down and red zone efficiency was a whole lot better. And I think that that's only going to continue to grow. We're only seeing the very vanilla version of Ryan Grubb's offense at this point in the preseason, right? This is going to continue to grow. This is going to continue to get a whole heck of a lot better. We're not seeing any of the tricks that Grubb has up his sleeve. So he's not going to pull out that stuff, and maybe that's why we did see 3 straight runs to end that drive, because he doesn't want to give away too much here early in the season. Let's see what the running backs can do up the gut. So on the topic of Sam Howell and PJ Walker, I'm definitely higher on Sam Howell out of this game. Obviously, the 4.8 yards per attempt is not great, but that was mostly based off of play calling and scheme more than it was the decisions that he was making. So I like what I saw from this offense, especially in those areas that Seattle struggled in last season.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out the red zone, because I know they missed that fourth down run, Holani getting stuff. And look, there's very few running backs that would have had a chance to score on that. Oluwatimi whiffed on his block. And when you're running an inside run at the goal line and your center barely gets a fingertip on the guy across from him, normally bad things are going to happen. But I did think that was kind of a predictable vanilla ending to that drive. Nonetheless, they were 2 for 2 in the red zone in the first half and got touchdowns on both those opportunities. So 66% in the red zone, 55% in third downs. Look, if you can consistently do that, and by the way, they almost had 40 minutes of possession, and that was another area. They were dead last in the NFL in possession last year. So I am incredibly encouraged by all of that stuff. Football is football in that sense. Obviously, when you're going against starters in the NFL, it's a lot harder to convert in those situations, but the Seahawks will have their starters, all their starters back as well when the season starts. So this is an encouraging first step. There's no question about it. When we continue our post-game episode of Locked On Seahawks here, it's time for our first game balls of the season. Connor and I will be dishing out game balls on offense, defense, and special teams. That'll be coming up next here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. Whether it's speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Well, back to post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined on this show by my co-host, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s for listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks getting into the win column for the first time under head coach Mike Macdonald. I know it's not an official win, but this is going to be a very meaningful one for Mike Macdonald as a first-time head coach. A 16-3 victory over the Chargers at SoFi Stadium. We just broke down the defense's dominance and the offense's efficiency on third down in the red zone. When you're checking off those three boxes and you're not turning the football over, the Seahawks didn't have any tonight. When you are checking off those boxes, it's going to be a rare occasion where you don't win a football game. So I know Mike Macdonald's got to be excited about that. Let's get to our game balls now, shall we? The first time this year. Connor, you and I are going to both dish out a game ball choice of our own on offense, defense, and special teams. We're going to start on the offensive side of the football. Who gets your game ball on offense coming out of this victory over the Chargers?
Yeah, I know you love George Holani, Corbin, but I'm going to go Kenny McIntosh on this one just because he looked the part of that third down back. And that's not necessarily to say that George Holani didn't. George Holani just got 2 less carries, and we didn't see a ton of the explosive plays out of George Holani. Obviously, he had the 11-yard rushing touchdown, but I'm not putting too much weight into that touchdown just based off of the blatant hold out of Tyler Mabry that allowed that touchdown to happen. Kenny McIntosh just looked the part of what I was saying on the last episode that I was on, where he has that explosiveness, he has that elusiveness, the ability to make guys miss. He had that grit. He was fighting for extra yards on most of his carries. Obviously, the 8 carries for 40 yards is a great number to be at if you're a running back. We like that overall, just in terms of an average. In terms of just putting the ball in his hands, which is what they did quite a bit, I really liked what I saw from Kenny McIntosh, and it's going to be really tough. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk of, who are we going to keep on this roster as the third running back? And I think it's really tight between McIntosh and Holani. I think when it comes down to it right now, it's going to be really, really difficult to either cut one of those guys and keep them on the practice squad, or just which one are you going to keep on the 53-man roster as the third running back. I think at this point you might keep both of them on the 53-man roster and try to figure out some other person to let go or keep on the practice squad, whatever it might be. Overall, Kenny McIntosh just passed the eye test for me tonight.
Yeah, I thought McIntosh played well, and I thought George Holani played really well as well. Holani was on my short list for guys to consider here, but I'm going to maybe go with a player that is going to surprise some people. But if you were watching the game closely, Derek Young was the best receiver that the Seahawks had today. 3 catches, 44 yards. He had a 26-yard gain, the most explosive play that the Seahawks had on offense all day. And look, Connor, we've seen this kid. We have seen the testing, the athletic ability he's got at 220 pounds. There are very few guys at his size that have the athleticism and the strength that he brings to the table. And he's been a really good special teams player. He continued that today with a special teams tackle, but he led the team with 3 catches, 44 yards. He had that explosive play, which we know the athleticism's there. And maybe this is what I'm most excited about. It seemed like the stage was a little bright for him at times the last couple of years in the preseason. A Division II guy, He had a few issues with drops. Today, he was absolutely money. He's been money in training camp, catching pretty much everything that is within his grasp in his zip code. He's been catching. So I think Derek Young just further solidified his standing that he's going to be on this football team because he's a great special teams player, but you also can see the athletic traits he has that a lot of guys on this roster at the receiver position that are battling for those 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever positions you're looking at. He's got athletic traits that very few of those guys have as a whole, and we're starting to see it come together into a really good football player. I'm happy to see him healthy at this stage. On the defensive side of the football, you and I think maybe we're kind of wrestling over one player in particular. I allowed you to have him. So who gets your game ball on defense?
Yeah, it's going to be Derek Hall. It's going to be Derek Hall, and that's just because obviously tied for the team lead in tackles. It's preseason, so we're not going to put too much weight in that, but tied for the team lead in tackles with John Radigan at 5. Had that sack, which is debatable whether it was supposed to be credited to him. But overall, it's not even just about the raw production here. Obviously, people put so much weight into sacks and pressures and QB hits and all these different things. But whenever you watch an edge rusher play football at the end of the day, is he getting into the backfield? Is he disrupting the play and what the offense wants to do? There was a couple plays where I just watched Derek Hall be shot out of a cannon off that side of the ball. And it was incredible to watch him go. He looks so much faster than he did. And you see the reason he's able to get and turn that corner is because he's also using his hands better than he did last year. And I think that's going to be a big thing. And that's what he's talked about so far in training camp, Corbin, is just the fact that he's worked on the use of his hands in the offseason and through training camp and things like that. And we all know how valuable that is as an edge rusher. And so I think that obviously, he's not playing first-team offenses in this first preseason game, and we're not going to see him probably play first-team offenses until the regular season. But overall, and I wrote about this earlier today, it was just like, if we're going to have Derek Hall play in this game, which is expected considering the starters are going to be on the field as well, just let Derek Hall go out there and feast on this offense. And that's what they did. And I'm really glad that they did that, and he was able to take that opportunity and turn that into a defensive game ball from Connor Benintendi. So there you go. Not that that means much for him, but probably
come on, that's a huge deal.
It probably means nothing to him whatsoever, but, there it is.
Well, listen, I'm going to give him a sliver of the game ball. I know it would pop if I actually did that, but I'm going to give him a sliver of the game ball just because, as you mentioned, the disruption things, what I really look for. Devere Levelston got a sack today because Derek Hall forced the quarterback to step up into Levelston because he had the pressure initially. There were a couple other plays that he was back there. You could have maybe given him 3 or 4 pressures depending on how generous you're being, but he was very disruptive in this game, and that's what we've seen in training camp too. Now, as you said, though, I don't think the sack he had actually should have been credited to him. So I'm going to give my game ball to the guy that it should have been credited to. Let's give John Radigan, the pride of Army, just a little bit of love. He was tied for the team lead in tackles. He had a sack on a blitz earlier in the game. And Derek Hall's sack, I went back and watched it a couple times. That looked to me like John Radigan should have gotten that sack. So this should have been a 2-sack, 3-tackle for loss performance for John Radigan. And look, Jerome Baker is out right now. We don't know when he's going to be back. Tyrell Dodson's got 15 starts under his belt. He had an injury he was coming back from this offseason. John Radigan has got to be ready to go. That's a guy that very easily could be playing snap for you at some point this year in the middle of your defense. So he's got to be ready to go. He looks like he is comfortable in this defense. I think he's enjoying being able to blitz a little bit more. He's really getting after as a run defender. So I was really intrigued by what I saw today from John Radigan, and he's had a good training camp. I'm not going to say it's been great by any means, but when he's had his opportunities, he's been able to stand out some. Today, I thought he was one of the best defensive players on the field for the Seahawks in this dominant effort. So giving some love to number 59. Now, special teams, Connor, we talked about this before. We're supposed to pick different players, but I think this award is really going to be an all-encompassing one because I almost thought offensive game ball for this player, but Laviska Shenault has got to be the selection. A 44-yard kick return, like that got me fired up, seeing what he can do. And again, that running back background, he's got 50 career carries under his belt. You can see that vision from him. He had Jake Bobo, and I believe that the other blocker in front of him was Cody White. Those two were out in front, and they created a crease, and with his vision, he was able to find that and then explode, ran over a guy at the tail end of it to get an extra few yards. That was exciting. We got to see 2 bubble screens go to him that he got 31 yards out of, breaking tackles left and right. Like, that is what they thought D. Eskridge was going to be. And this guy's doing it at a much larger size, 220, 225 pounds. He looked the part of a unique weapon that can be a complement to all the other pieces the Seahawks have on offense. And the special teams value has me fired up.
Yeah, I think at this point, you can't argue anybody over as the primary returner over Laviska Shenault. I mean, this guy, and this is something that Jay Harbaugh talked about, is the vision is going to be one of the biggest traits that they're looking at when trying to find an effective returner for this new kickoff format. And that, again, that could be a running back. It could be, but
yep.
It's not always going to be that. He also talked about Trey Brown as having great vision, which Trey Brown plays cornerback. No surprise there. So Laviska Shenault coming in, he has been able to show that ability. He's carried the ball in his career. This is not something that he's never done before, right? Like,
yep.
We know that Laviska Shenault has been taking carries out of the backfield in his career. So it's not a shock that he has an ability to read gaps and be able to run through gaps and things like that. So at this point, right now, who do you have that is, let's say, the perfect balance between a low injury risk in terms of effect on your offense and also productive as a kick returner, right? You don't want to put somebody like Tyler Lockett back out there, even though he was an exceptional returner, early on in his career, because also Lockett is a little bit slower maybe than he used to be, but also you don't want to risk injury there. And same with a lot of your other running backs. You don't want to put Zach Charbonnet or Ken Walker out there because you don't want them to get injured. Laviska Shenault has that perfect balance between, he's maybe going to be that third or fourth guy that's going to come in on the outside in our offense, but we can also balance that with putting him in at the kick return position. And he's had this duality of both receiving passes and carrying the football. And he showed that in his one opportunity today. He showed that. And we've seen, if anybody that is watching right now has watched preseason football, we've seen so many disastrous kick returns happen so far in the preseason. They just look terrible. And then Laviska Shenault catches the ball and he goes for, 44 yards? I think you said
44
Corbin?
yards. Yep.
And that's beautiful. That's what you want to see. So the fact that he was able to do that on one opportunity, we're only going to continue to see that build up. And I think that they have a lot of faith right now, especially Jay Harbaugh and Laviska Shenault's ability to return kicks.
When we come back, we are going to switch gears to our stock watch. 3 up, 3 down. Who's hot, who's not, coming out of today's win at SoFi Stadium. Don't go away. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it, as we will do in each and every one of our post-game shows. We got to have our stock watch, our first stock watch of the season. Who's hot, who's not, which players are trending upward, which ones are going to be looking to bounce back in the second preseason game. And let's start with the positives, which players are hot coming out of this game. And I think you and I would both agree that there's one name at tight end that is going to jump to the top of this list that I talked about him earlier this week. He has been impressing in training camp. That is the one trend today. Sometimes you don't see those guys that practice really well carried over to preseason games. But we have seen that with a number of these players, whether it's Derek Hall, George Halani, Brady Russell is another one of them. Had a touchdown catch today, broke a tackle on that 13-yard touchdown. He continues to be one of Seattle's very best special teams players. Ended up with 3 catches for 25 yards, is getting the trust of the quarterbacks. It almost feels like this point with his special teams ability, he is on this roster now.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you can count. I wouldn't take Brady Russell off this roster at this point. I mean, this is to the point where He's proven himself. I think I heard either it was early in off season or early in training camp that, he was even the backup long snapper or backup holder. I mean, this guy has so much versatility and an ability to just be a football player, Corbin. And whenever he got on the field today and was able to make the most of his opportunities, that was not an easy touchdown catch that he had. I mean, the fact that he was able to slip, I counted 4 defenders that he was able to slip on his way to the end zone, 2 kind of before the 2 or so yard line, and then about 2 that he dove under in order to get in. If you subtract that touchdown reception from Sam Howell's stat line, how are you looking at Sam Howell's stat line, right? I mean, that was mostly Brady Russell who did that. So in terms of just the depth chart, and this is something we talked about, Corbin, a couple days ago, just of the tight ends coming into this game, it was going to be one of the more intriguing position groups to watch, especially because you have obviously A.J. Barner, who was a draft pick, 4th-round draft pick by the Seahawks. You have Brady Russell, who's been with this team since last season. You obviously have Jack Westover, who's an undrafted rookie. And we wanted to see Tyler Mabry as well, who's been with the team since 2020 as an undrafted rookie. You have these 4 tight ends who are kind of in this bind at the back end of the depth chart behind Farrell Brown and Noah Fant. And it's difficult, especially for a lot of fans who are trying to see what this room is going to look like. Where do these players fit in terms of their skill set, right? Like which one is each going to contribute to this offense? We know Noah Fant's a pass catcher. We know Farrell Brown has been a very effective blocker. But where are each of these 4 guys going to fit into this offense? And I think you just see Brady Russell tonight. Brady Russell just showed that he's an athlete, and he can go out there, and when he gets an opportunity to catch a pass, that he's going to make a play out of that. And that's so valuable, not only to the offense, but also that's a mentality that carries over to special teams also.
You gave your offensive game ball to Kenny McIntosh. And as I mentioned, George Holani was on my short list. And I know you were a little more impressed with McIntosh in this game, but I'm looking at the entire package here. And McIntosh got blown up not once but twice in pass protection, and that is still a big problem that he is going to have to overcome here. George Holani had 2 really good blitz pickups, and D. Eskridge had a 22-yard run on a jet sweep that would have been about 5 or 6 yards if not for George Holani. He took the corner and just basically drove him out of bounds. It was a phenomenal block. So we're seeing Holani get after it there. He had a special teams tackle. And oh, by the way, he had an 11-yard touchdown. And I know Tyler Mabry, I would agree with you. He probably got away with something there. But still, you can see the explosiveness. You can see the spryness from George Holani. I saw the same player out there I've been seeing at training camp practice for the last couple of weeks. So I don't think either one of those players hurt themselves to win that 3rd down job, but it is as tight as it has been at any point between those guys who is going to win that job. And so I think George Holani, when you're going to complete game, he just did a number of things that Kenny McIntosh did not do in this game. And so I think you've got to give him a little bit of love. And let's give Kobe Bryant some love too, because listen, I'm not going to say that I've been too hard on him because it hasn't been about the player and his talent. It's been the secondary that Seattle's got. But he goes out and gets an interception that led directly to George Holani's touchdown. And Bryant got that off a deflection from Kayvon Wallace. But you're seeing the alertness and the instincts this kid has. They translate well to the safety position. And so that is a big play for him. I think it's big for his confidence because he's been through a lot. He was the starting slot corner 2 years ago, and then last year had injuries, comes in this year with all these new pieces around him. Where does he fit in? For him to go out there early in this game and make that pick, I think that that's going to be a big confidence booster for him. And I think it's going to inspire the coaching staff to give him more opportunities when they could be playing 3 or even 4 safety sets at times in Mike Macdonald's defense.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see particularly how Kobe Bryant performs over these next 2 preseason games as well. But I think it backs up what I kind of felt about Kobe Bryant over his first 2 years in the league, which was that he just always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Even when he was playing corner, and he always managed to, 4 forced fumbles his rookie year. He just always managed to find some way to make a play, right? And that did not change tonight whenever he's able to just be in the – he had one obviously missed interception, but the first one, he was just sitting there right behind Kayvon Wallace blowing up Hayden Hurst. And he just always happens to be in that spot ready to make a play. And I think that that's going to be something that's something you can't teach, right, Corbin? I mean, that's something that is just going to be not scheme related, not position related in any way whatsoever. It's just all in your head, right?
It's
the
mental.
mental game. It's the mental game. It's a ball sense, right? I mean, they call it a ball hawk, I guess. That's what some people call it nowadays, which I'm fine with. But it's a knack for flying to the football. And I think that that's so important as a professional football player. I'm very curious to see where he fits on this team. And I think overall tonight, all he did was help himself. So
let's go to the downside here. The three players that didn't necessarily help themselves out in this game. And look, this might be a situation where it feels like I'm piling on a player, but I just have not been impressed by what Stone Forsythe has done this training camp. And I thought he looked really rough tonight. And Sam Howell had a couple of times that if Forsythe would have held up as a blocker, I think he could have got the ball downfield. And I think he wanted to, but unfortunately, when your tackle is not protecting and there's quick pressure, that really limits what you can do in the pocket. And a couple of those times, Howell had to unload the ball out of play because he didn't have time to be able to go through his reads. I just am wondering where Forsythe fits into the equation because I felt like McClendon Curtis played pretty solid tonight when he was in the game. Mike Jarrell had his moments tonight. When we go back and look at the film, we can pick apart this a little bit more. But I thought Mike Jarrell looked solid tonight. I don't know where Forsythe in the last year of his rookie contract fits into the equation here. It feels like the Seahawks have some other options who, quite frankly, are playing better right now.
Yeah, there were two shockers to me whenever Seattle's offense came out today, and that was that Nick Harris was starting at center, just because I thought Oluwatimi would get that nod, which Mike Macdonald kind of talked about it in the post-game press conference, that was just the plan, and it wasn't a big deal. I think Olu came in on the third drive. But the second one was that Stone Forsythe was starting at left tackle. And when you really think about it, I don't know who they would have put there, given the fact that George Fant wasn't playing, Charles Cross wasn't playing. There's not a lot of options there in terms of who you're going to put out with the first team offense. And obviously Stone Forsythe has regular season experience. He's been there. He started for the Seahawks. But he did not help himself in terms of maintaining even a backup role tonight. And I think there were so many snaps that you look at where, Stone Forsythe is on a borderline false start also because he's jumping off the ball so quickly. He looked jumpy. He looked nervous. And Sam Howell, whenever the ball was snapped and Stone Forsythe inevitably was trying to drop deep into pass protection and basically collapse the pocket automatically, without even having much pressure in front of him, was making things even worse on Sam Howell when they didn't need to be. And it's just, there's so many things there that you just look at it and you say, okay, this is not a sustainable situation. And obviously he started mostly at right tackle last year. Okay. So there's going to be a difference obviously with switching sides, but we know that versatility is a big thing with this offensive line. Can you go between different positions? Obviously Connor Williams coming in, he could play both center and guard. We have George Fant, who's played both tackle sides. We have Laken Tomlinson, who's played both guards. There's so much versatility along here. If you're the one guy who cannot move between different spots, that also hurts you. And I just didn't see a lot from Stone Forsythe tonight to put him in a position where I want him to be a regular player for the Seahawks.
As far as a few other players worth mentioning here, I know there's a running back you want to discuss. I'm going to throw Jason Myers on here, and I know he made a 48-yard field goal, and that's great. You got to be able to consistently make those. But he has been plagued his entire career by missed extra points, and doing that in a preseason game is not necessarily a good look. And also, this is just because I've seen the last week or so he has not been good in practice. He started the camp off well, but it's almost like he's bucking the normal even odd trends. Now, maybe that doesn't carry over to the regular season. He gets his groove back on, but missing an extra point in a preseason game, not a good look. And the fact that he's been struggling on top of that, maybe that led to my selection here. But Seattle is supposed to be counting on him to be one of the best kickers in the league with what they're paying him, and he misses an extra point in a preseason game. Not necessarily something that you want to see from your high-priced kicker.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that went through my head whenever I saw him miss that point after attempt is just – it's an even year. What are we doing here? Like, this is not Jason, this is supposed to be your year. Like, we're not supposed to be missing point afters, and especially not in the preseason. Like, come on, man. This is something that you're supposed to have down pat. Obviously, this is not how it works. It doesn't just work as even year, odd year in an actual, reality situation here. But overall, it's not what you want to see from your kicker. And I want to shift to the running back side of things here, just in Kobe Lewis, and obviously the fact that he saw the most touches out of any running back tonight. And I thought that, to put it as lightly as I possibly can, Kobe Lewis did not look good. And I think that makes it a pretty clear gap between Helani, McIntosh, and all the other running backs on, particularly Kyrie Robinson and Kobe Lewis on this roster. And I think there's not much drama between 3-4 and the rest of the running backs that are here on the roster right now. And I just think he didn't show a lot of vision overall. He was running just kind of into bodies a lot of the night. I think it was 10 carries for 33. Sorry, I'm pulling it up. 10 carries for 33 yards, so 3.3 yards per carry. In a preseason game, it's just not what you want to see out of a running back. So I'm not too high on Kobe Lewis right now. I don't think he makes this roster. It's early. I understand. Maybe I'm being too critical, but he just tried to use a little bit too much power. I just didn't see it there. So.
Yeah, he's had a decent camp at times, but there hasn't been the consistency there, and you don't see the juice. I mean, he did have a long touchdown run earlier this week, but you don't necessarily consistently see that juice from him. It does seem like there's a pretty wide gap between. That's why I'm thinking 4 running backs in the roster is very doable, and those 4 are already well established. There's not somebody else that's going to be crashing that. So, it's unfortunate in this case for a player who has had some flashes in camp, but Helani and McIntosh seem like those are the 2 guys that are battling for that third down job, and everybody else is just kind of on the roster. You'll get some practice squad contention potentially, but not going to be in the mix for a spot on the 53. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at CJohnBenintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, Rob Rang and I are going to be dishing out our latest 53-man roster projections coming out of Saturday's preseason opener. Of course, we'll talk a little bit more about tonight's win over the Chargers as well. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and soak up that preseason W. Go Hawks.